Okay, so, when you have a sitting Supreme Court Justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson, actually coming out and saying publicly that the Trump administration's attacks on judges are, quote, not random.
And designed to intimidate. That part really jumps out.
Exactly. Designed to intimidate. I mean, that's not just politics as usual anymore, is it?
Yeah.
That feels like a major warning sign for our democracy.
It's incredibly striking. For a justice to use language like that, designed to intimidate.
Wow.
It even carries legal undertones, It hints at potential obstruction, maybe other power abuses.
Right. It's not just disagreement. It's something else.
It suggests a really grave threat to the independence of the judiciary.
Which is why we wanted to do this deep dive. This isn't about just, catching up on the latest headline. We want to really unpack what Justice Jackson said.
Yeah, put it in context.
Put it in the context of the administration's whole agenda, this new Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, they're calling it, and this just relentless targeting of judges who don't rule their way. Our mission here really is to cut through all that noise and figure out what this danger actually means for the foundations of how our government is supposed to work.
And Justice Jackson's comments, they aren't really in a vacuum, are they? It feels like confirmation of a pattern.
A pattern. Explain that.
Well, a calculated strategy, maybe, to chip away at judicial independence. That crucial check and balance in our system.
Okay, let's get right into that strategy then. The attacks on the judiciary. Jackson sees it clearly as deliberate.
Not just random outbursts.
No. And we've seen it happen, right? When judges rule against controversial policies, like, remember the attempt to use the old Alien Enemies Act for mass deportations?
Oh, absolutely. And the stories about planes being turned around mid-flight, the recklessness is just astounding.
So judges push back on things like that based on the law, and then what happens?
Well, that's where Justice Jackson's point about intimidation comes in. The administration often doesn't just argue the law or appeal through normal channels.
No, it gets personal.
It escalates. Personal attacks, questioning a judge's patriotism even, threats. It's about undermining their legitimacy.
And the goal, you think, is just to make judges scared, to make them think twice before ruling against the White House.
That seems to be the implication. Creating a climate where fear, not law, influences decisions, and Justice Jackson's quote nails it. The attacks are not random. They seem designed to intimidate.
The threats and harassment are attacks on our democracy, on our system of government, and they ultimately risk undermining our Constitution and the rule of law. Coming from a Supreme Court justice, that's powerful.
It really is, because an independent judiciary depends on judges making calls based only on the law, without fearing retaliation. If the executive branch makes them afraid, the whole system is compromised.
Okay, let's talk about this new department, DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. Even the acronym.
It has a certain ring to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, not necessarily a good one. So they say it's about streamlining things, making government more efficient, but is that really it?
Well, that's the stated goal. But when you see it alongside these attacks on judges, on other institutions, you start to wonder.
I wonder if it's more about consolidating power.
Exactly. Could it be a way to centralize control in the White House, maybe bypass some of the usual oversight, get the agenda pushed through with less scrutiny?
So another tool to weaken checks and balances, making it harder for anyone to push back.
That's a real risk, yeah. If you centralize power too much, even under the banner of efficiency, the potential for overreach, for abuse, it goes way up.
Which makes the courts, the ones already under attack, even more important.
Absolutely critical, assuming they can remain independent.
Which brings us back to those intimidation tactics. Because this isn't just abstract. It affects real people, judges, their families.
Oh, definitely. When the president publicly singles out a judge, calls them names, that sends a message.
And people listen.
And unfortunately, yes, there's a correlation between that kind of rhetoric and judges then facing harassment, maybe even real threats. It's not just politics at that point. It's about safety, security.
It's what some people call stochastic terrorism, right? Where the rhetoric isn't a direct order, but it incites sort of random acts from people who feel motivated by it, aimed right at the courts.
It's a disturbing concept, but yeah, it seems like an applicable framework here. If you constantly paint judges as enemies or traitors because you don't like their rulings,
someone might eventually act on that.
Precisely. Someone might feel justified.
Even Chief Justice Roberts, who's usually very reserved, felt he had to say something.
That statement about impeachment not being a tool just because you disagree with a judge's ruling.
Yeah, that seemed pretty significant coming from him.
It was significant. It showed how serious the situation had become, that the Chief Justice himself needed to defend that basic principle of judicial independence.
But, like, one rare statement from Roberts versus this constant daily barrage from the administration.
It feels unequal, doesn't it?
Totally. And now you hear open calls for impeaching judges just for their legal rulings. That sounds like what Representative Jamie Raskin called a constitutional crisis in motion.
Raskin put his finger right on it. The idea of impeaching judges for, doctrinal differences, because their legal interpretation isn't the president's. That's a massive departure from how our system is supposed to work.
It's dangerous.
It fundamentally misunderstands or maybe ignores the whole point of having independent courts.
And Trump's focus on Judge Boasberg, it feels personal. Because Boasberg ruled against using that Alien Enemies Act.
Well, using that act itself is revealing. It's an old law, really meant for declared wars, gives the executive huge power with very little judicial check.
So trying to use it for deportations now.
It shows a desire to just bypass the normal legal processes, the safeguards that protect people's rights. It's about finding ways around judicial review.
So it's not about the law, it's about power. Just raw power, like do what I say or else obedience over the Constitution.
That seems to be the underlying message. A preference for unchecked executive authority, due process, rule of law. Those become obstacles.
And then you've got Stephen Miller, his language. Wow. Calling a ruling that requires due process a legal insurrection against national sovereignty.
That kind of rhetoric is, well, it's extreme. To call applying basic legal principles an insurrection, it's just incredibly disrespectful to the courts.
It feels designed to inflame.
And it works to demonize judges further, eroding public trust. If people hear that judges are leading an insurrection, why would they trust their decisions?
It's like weaponized xenophobia too, right? Implying that any legal protection for immigrants is an attack on the country itself. And I heard Raskin also called him out on his history.
Yeah, Miller's claims about warrants and due process never applying an immigration law. Raskin pointed out that's just historically inaccurate. It's complex, sure, but legal checks have always been part of it, even if inconsistently applied.
Raskin really summed up Trump's message to judges, didn't he? Basically, rule my way or I'll push to impeach you.
It's an ultimatum, not a legal argument.
And that's the threat. Rule based on ideology, not law, or face consequences. That's a huge shift.
It moves us towards ideological purity tests for judges, which is absolutely not what the founders intended. It's dangerous.
Then you hear Trump at rallies.
Yeah.
Calling judges who block him communist, radical left judges.
It's a classic delegitimization tactic, isn't it? Slap an extreme label on anyone who opposes you.
Avoids dealing with the substance entirely.
Exactly. Just dismiss them.
It's dehumanizing too, painting them as enemies just for doing their constitutional job. And he always frames it as, they're stopping me from keeping you safe.
Right. Portraying legal limits as threats to security. That's a common authoritarian playbook. Any check on power is painted as dangerous.
So when Justice Jackson warns us, it's not just about like a few mean tweets. It's this whole ecosystem.
It's a much broader assault on democratic institutions, yeah. The judiciary is one piece, but we see similar patterns with attacks on the press, on election integrity, attempts to purge civil servants.
Weaponizing agency.
It all seems interconnected, undermining those checks and balances.
And now they're taking this fight over Venezuelan deportation straight to the Supreme Court, asking them to fast-track it.
That's definitely a big test for the court, isn't it? Especially with the newer justices. Will they stand up for the rule of law against this kind of executive pressure, even in a really charged case?
We'll have to see. But all of this, it must be doing real long-term damage to public trust, right? Making people see courts as just political.
Absolutely. When the judiciary is constantly framed as a political battlefield, people lose faith in its impartiality. And if that legitimacy erodes, the foundation of our legal system gets shaky.
And the hypocrisy, the whole law and order mantra.
But then attacking the legal system itself when it gets in your way.
Yeah. It shows that law and order seems to be a tool for them, not a principle they actually respect when it applies to their own power.
It becomes very selective. Law for thee, but not for me, essentially.
And we should probably mention the role of parts of the media in this.
Oh, for sure. Right-wing media often acts as a huge amplifier for these attacks, repeating the rhetoric, legitimizing it for their audience. That definitely helps erode broader trust.
So what does this all mean globally? Our image. America as a beacon of democracy.
It takes a massive hit, doesn't it? How can the U.S. credibly promote democratic norms abroad when things like this are happening at home? It gives ammunition to actual authoritarian regimes around the world.
Okay, so for people listening to this,
hmm
what's the takeaway? What can anyone even do?
Well, first, just being informed, paying attention, understanding that this isn't normal political noise, that the stakes are really high.
Don't tune it out.
Right. And then, supporting organizations that work to protect these institutions, demanding accountability from elected officials, asking them where they stand on judicial independence. It sounds basic, but it matters.
Because going back to Justice Jackson's warning, this isn't random. It feels like a deliberate project.
A project to dismantle checks and balances, perhaps. Her warning serves as a really crucial reminder that democracy isn't guaranteed. It needs defending.
And that defense requires vigilance, understanding what's happening.
It's an ongoing responsibility, really, for everyone who values that system.
So let's just pause on that for a second. A sitting Supreme Court justice says the administration's attacks are not random, designed to intimidate and risk undermining our Constitution. Just let that reality sink in. What does it signal about where things stand?
It really forces you to ask, doesn't it?
Right.
How resilient are these institutions we take for granted? When they face this kind of sustained internal pressure, what's the breaking point? And what happens after?
That is definitely something to think about. Thank you for walking through this with us. And for you listening, keep digging deeper, keep asking questions. We'll be back soon with another deep dive.